6. We have laws on how we treat sentient species. We have laws on how we treat animals and semi-sentients. We even have laws protecting plants. But we have absolutely no laws whatsoever governing the welfare of clone troops. Human beings. They have no legal status, no rights, no freedoms, and no representation. Every one of you here who accepted this army without murmur should hang your head in shame. If that's the depths we as a republic can sink to in the name of democracy, it hardly surprises me that the CIS wants to break away. The end can never justify means like this. Senator Denskina of Chandela, addressing the Senate 18 months after the Battle of Geonosis, after setting up a charitable appeal to fund the only veterans' welfare facility in the Republic. Rebel Camp, Gaftika, 473 days after Geonosis. Thighs stared at the man and at Tin as they hauled Sol out of the speeder, and half carried him to the center of the camp. The ARC trooper was hobbled, but it hadn't stopped him from taking a good kick at Atin when they had bundled him into the vehicle. He looked ready to kill now. Daman felt guilty. I'd be doing the same. I wouldn't let anyone take me alive. Fai stood with hands on hips. So he followed you home, and now you want to keep him. He looked Sol up and down, and tutted loudly. I suppose you couldn't resist his big, appealing eyes. Atin peeled off Sol's gag. Shove it, snarled the ARC. Daman held up his bandaged hand. It was swollen and throbbing, despite Bacta and a one shot of antibiotic. He bites too. Just keep him off the furniture. Fai turned towards the camp buildings, 2 fingers in his mouth, and delivered a piercing whistle. Now watch Aden lose his temper. It's very entertaining. Aden came at a run from one of the buildings, now wearing his ARC armor with its dark green sergeant's trim. Helmet clipped at the small of his back, and rattling against the belt of his kama. Sol stared. A small circle of curious merits started to form. The knoll skidded to a halt and wheeled around on them. Face like thunder. And you lot can clear off. This is trooper business. Get lost. Yosenia. Even the dominant lizards with their red frills scattered as if he lobbed a grenade among them. Aden had that edge, just like Ordo and the others. The look and the tone that said he was a man who would erupt into unpredictable violence. Even non-humans picked it up and heeded the warning. So, you took a prisoner, Aden said. All the scarier for suddenly being softly spoken. Did you think it through at all? You make a habit of this. I heard it was Phi who brought home strays last time. Dynamic risk assessment, Phi said. Making it up as you go along. Same thing. Dekut. But Daman had done what he had to. He didn't plan on apologizing for that. He was supposed to be MIA, not AWOL. Well, he was missing, and he is in action. Just not for the Republic. Aiden looked Sol over, and Darman wondered if he was looking for injuries, or just finding a fresh spot to make a bruise. And you can't be absent without leave if you don't get leave. So nobody lied to you, did they? I didn't seem to get it a few moments later than Darman. You knew he'd gone over to the Seps. Some things are best left alone, said Aiden. I worked it out. Sure you did. Sol seemed to latch on to Aiden as a brother arc, and decided he ran the show. He turned his back on Darman. I haven't gone over as you put it. I'm just not fighting for the Republic anymore. Sort of legal point. You'll have to explain it. So now that you've got me, what are you going to do? You don't have a long list of options for a deserter. Deserter. Darman wished Aiden had shot him. Somehow, Sol would have seemed more honorable if he'd taken up arms for the Seps, rather than sitting out the war, while brother clones like Sicko. He never forgot Sicko. None of them did. Died at the front. But Sol didn't strike him as a coward. Nina jogged across the clearing in his black undersuit, towel draped around his neck, and Darman braced for a lecture on doing things by the book. Vi moved in to intercept him. What I do next depends on how much grief you'll create from me and my brothers, Aiden said. He took a look at the Ark Brown's wrists as if he was thinking of untying them, and then seemed to change his mind. So, we can stand here like the cabaret at the Outlander, amusing the merits, or discuss this in private. Sol was unbowed. Why not just shoot me now while I'm still trussed? Spook. Because I'm not going back to the Gar. If you want to make me, one of us is going to have to kill the other. Fiefrek. What are you two? Nina said. Hibble spiders. Cut the Osik. Regulations are clear. He's a traitor. We take him in. Nina shot it. Aiden took out a vibroblade, ducked down, and sliced through the plastroid tape around Sol's ankles. And any kicking or biting, Nervard, and I'll remove something you are very attached to. Civilized chat, like comrades, got it? Sol paused, seemed to consider dismemberment, and then nodded. They had an audience again. The Marth rebels had edged nearer, one lizard at a time, and were now standing in earshot with their heads cocking, back and forth in curiosity. Aiden turned with slow menace, and they scattered again. He hadn't said Omega couldn't follow, though, so the four of them trooped after him and sat down on the long bench in the sparsely furnished ops room to watch the conversation. It was a grand name for the place. The Maris had built their camp like they built the homes for the humans in Iet, and the HQ building was a comfortable little house with sliding interior walls and shutters made from translucent lurid bark. Utterly unmilitary in every respect. It would vanish in a ball of flame if anything bigger than a stun round hit it. Rebel camp. It was a village. The weapons and artillery pieces were real, though, and the citizens of Yet didn't appear to venture out of their city strongholds. Aiden dragged a chair across the planked floor and sat Sol down, hands still tied behind his back, while he stalked around the room. He gave Omega a glance that told them they would be watching in silence and taking notes. "So," he said, "tell me, when you first lost your enthusiasm for a long-term military career in the glorious Grand Army of the Republic." "Let me see." Sol looked up theatrically, at a point above and to the right. "I think it was when they blew my buddy's brains out. Yes, I do believe it was." "Who's they?" Dummett asked. "You keep saying they." Aiden raised an eyebrow. "I'm doing the interrogation." "He asked if they had sent me, Sergeant." "Okay." Aiden patted Sol's head, more like a couple of slow slaps by way of warning. "Answer the man." "You're one of Skarata's undisciplined rabble, aren't you?" "Proud to say so, yes." "You've got no love for the Republic, then. Ever wonder what happens to us when we're no more use?" "Yes, but I didn't know you had." Dummett was sure every clone did. He thought about it almost as much as he thought about Etain, which was a lot. He held his breath, waiting for some insight. Somehow he knew it wasn't going to be good news. "So, did Alpha 02, said Sol. "Remember him. Spar, first off the line." "I've got perfect recall," Aiden said. "Of course I remember. He went missing more than a year before we shipped out for Geonosis. And you lot were the second batch after us." Daman marveled at the ability of any trooper to make it off Commando. He must have been given help, and Daman could think of at least 2 people who would have done just that. Sol leaned forward slightly, unable to sit back because of his handcuffs. Spar saw what was coming, and thought he would be better off taking his chances outside. And once we knew he was gone, well, quite a few of us started thinking. Heard from him since? No. He's doing a little bounty hunting and merc work now. Noel seemed to hear about everything one way or another. Tommy never asked how or why, but the comment looked designed to show Sol that Aiden had better intel than he did. The family business. He's not exactly trained to do anything else, is he? The Republic sent someone after him to kill him. Sure. They didn't get him, but my buddy Tavo decided to make a run for it a few months ago, and they caught him. Then they blew his brains out. They. Republic intelligence agents. The Chancellor's hit men. Sol didn't seem preoccupied with escape now. His mind was on events, and he looked past Aiden, as if there was someone standing to one side of him. He saw ghosts. Dalman and every commando who'd lost close brothers saw them too. We are not the only hired help in town. He's just like us. Damen realized he didn't know the Alpha Ox at all. Commandos and ARC troopers led totally separate lives on Commando during training. Bar necessary contact on exercises despite being part of Skarata's company. Omega never spent time with the Gnolls during those years, and they'd seemed every bit as scary and alien as the Alpha Ox. So Alpha Ox had buddies. Somehow he'd seen them as solitary killing machines, incapable of forming bonds like the tight-knit Commando squads, and then that's how everyone sees us. Damen realized he'd done what most civvies seemed to. He'd drawn a line beyond which someone else was less than him, just as citizens thought all clones were. Flesh machines. Wet droids, as Skarata used to call them. Things sent to die because they weren't like real people, and so it was okay. If that's how easy it is to think that way. Nina risked a comment. So that's the punishment for going over the wall. I'm not sure we should be surprised. No, chum. You've got it wrong, said Aiden. This isn't punishment, is it, Sol? All the fights seemed to have drained out of the ARC. Maybe he was just waiting to die. No, because punishment is a deterrent. And to deter anyone, they have to know what'll happen to them. But nobody gets told about ARCs, who are executed. Killed because they knew too much, 18 asked. Killed because they're neck battle dogs. Aiden ran the tip of his vibro blade under his nails and inspected the manicure. Once they're too old to fight, they can't be tamed as house pets. Dangerous savage things. They have to be put down, don't they, Solika? You can shove your Mando camaraderie, Sol said, but you've got it about right. And they'll come for you too, when you can't or won't fight any longer, Null boy. Nobody leaves the Grand Army. What do you think they had in mind for us when we weren't any more use? Putting us out to stud? Well, I was sort of hoping, Faiz said wistfully. We're not even any special use as a DNA bank. We are second generation's Django. They might as well get fresh material from troopers. They're less trouble. Damen didn't want to look at his squad comrades. He knew what was going through their minds. It had to be the same dread, that this limited life was all there would ever be for them. It hadn't seemed to matter back in Tipoca City. None of them had seen the world outside. Now they'd lived in cities and meet nice girls, and seen how other beings lived their lives. And they knew what they were missing. Not me. I'm not going to end up like that. Nina clicked his teeth in annoyance. He ran. Most of the ARC troopers are still doing their duty. You'll forgive me if I don't get sentimental about his inner turmoil. Yeah, whatever, Nina. Aiden spun the blade and gazed at the tip. Welcome to the complex world of morality. He paused, then bent over to face Sol, almost nose to nose. Damen expected to hear a crack of bone as the ARC head butted him. But the two men just stared. So what were you doing in Iat? I got a job. An apartment. Military sort of job? Advising the enemy? Driving repulsors cabs. And Iat's not the enemy. They're just more ordinary folks who are going to get creamed in another war. But if you wanted to stay there, you would have made sure they didn't lose, wouldn't you? I've been there for a few months. I'm not going to walk straight in, tell them I'm defecting, and show them the plans, am I? Sooner or later, Sol, you'll have to take sides before the Merit coup happens. The attack you were training the lizards to carry out. So, you want out? I'll draw you a picture, shall I? You can't stay here. I can't risk you on the outside, giving the Yati the codes and overrides, and getting more clones killed. And you aren't coming back inside, so... Aiden straightened up with the vibroblade, and for a moment, Domin thought he was going to kill Sol on the spot. But he cut the plastered cuffs, and then held the point of the blade just under Sol's chin, pressing into the flesh. The Orc rubbed his wrist. You waiting for something? Get off the planet, Aiden said. He took some cash credits out of his belt pouch. This is plenty to set you up again. I'll fix you transport to get a long way from Gaftika, on condition that you don't compromise another clone's safety. Sol shrugged. Aiden's offer seemed to have caught him off guard. This brotherly solidarity is touching, but we each have to look out for ourselves. Aiden glanced at his chrono. Put it another way, he said. You get off this rock and stay out of the war, or I'll put you out of circulation the permanent way. I like it here. Aiden looked up and jerked his thumb in the directions of the doors. Omega thin out. We are going to have a little arc-to-arc chat about Kama fashions, or some such OSIC. Nana got up without protest and made a follow-me gesture. The squad trooped out behind him and sat down, backs propped against the wall of the HQ building. He's still a traitor, Nana said at last. Daman stared ahead in defocus. The Merits had built a mock-up of a house and seemed to be rehearsing rapid entry, minus ordnance. They paused to steer back, then returned to their drill. But Sol's arrival had grabbed their attentions. Did they know who he was? Daman wondered if they could tell one clone from another except by uniform. He just doesn't trust the Republic, Daman said. I don't trust the Republic either. Aizen picked a blade of grass and studied it intently. But that doesn't mean I'd join the Seps. So what's not to trust? Asked Phi. Apart from the fact they bred us to die and treat us like dirt. Anyone can make a mistake. All that OSIC about the droid threat? For a start, I went on that sabotage mission with Pewdie. I saw the factory. I saw the production count. They're missing quite a few decimal places. It's bogus. But I still don't know where intelligence got it. Attica. Everyone lies like a hairy egg about troop strengths and kit and stuff, Daman said. He knew Scarata never told them the whole story. He said so. But the more the war ground on, the more Daman realized that it was all lie upon lie on both sides. Nothing ever added up. There were too few droids around to support the kind of numbers coming out of Republic intel. The Sith's claims were unsubstantiated. Propaganda, all part of the armory. And handy for getting the Senate to blindly approve spending. Yes, Daman could understand the politics now. The day you know what's actually going on in a war, son, you'll know you're watching a holovid. That's what Scarata said. Wars ran as much on lies and propaganda as they did on munitions. All you could ever really know was what was right in front of your own eyes. And even then it was open to interpretation. Even so, the Knolls seemed different in the last week or so. It was right after Atin came back grumbling that Cal and Ordo had sent him home after the sabotage mission. Atin didn't need to know what they were doing, they said. They denied it was connected to the hunt for General Grievous. Daman thought Scarata sailed too close to the wind these days. It was part of what made him a beloved Buer, but it also kept Daman awake some nights. I don't mind being shot at. It's having a government that lies to me that I hate. The clump, clump, clump of boots vibrated through the frame of the building, and Daman felt it in his back. Aiden and Sol were coming out. He checked that his sidearm was fully charged. Master Sol will be leaving Gaftakar in a few days, Aiden announced. Not looking at any of the squad, Sol trailed out after him, looking grim. Keep him fully entertained until his transport arrives. Nana just couldn't keep his mouth shut, standing up for what you believed was terrific. But sometimes it was just missing the point. But ARC Trooper Lieutenant Alpha 30 died of his injuries following an unknown incident. Okay, Aiden announced pointedly. He was too decomposed to ascertain a cause of death. But I recovered his armor and I'm returning his tally to SO Brigade. For records purposes, got it? Because if you didn't, I can repeat it even more slowly. I raised an eyebrow. He looks pretty decomposed to me. We'll give him a decent burial. Can I have his boots and Kama? But Nina wasn't giving in to add in without a speech. That was Nina all over. Daman suspected he would have given Ordo an equally hard time. His ultra straight decency anchored the squad. Sometimes, though, he just needed to look the other way and shut up. At what point does improvisation turn into complete collapse of discipline, Nervad? Aiden stared down at him as if he'd just noticed him. You think I should stick him on a desertion charge and return him to Zay for due process? That's what the regs say. Aiden looked away for a moment, as if he'd taken sudden interest in the merits. who'd now managed to demolish the training house, even without ordnance. They emitted excited, triumphant little squeals, totally at odds with their ferocity. Then the Knolls took his comlink from his belt and held it out to Nina. Okay, Mersheb, why don't you flash Zay and tell him we have a renegade orc on our hands? He got fed up waiting for Nina to take the link, reached down to grab his hand, and slapped the thing into his palm. Go on. Nina inhaled deeply, knuckles right as he gripped the device. Tommen caught Fi's eye and wondered if either of them would stop their sergeant. Atten looked studiously blank. Go on, mouth almighty, said Atten. Turn him in, if you've got the gutsy to do it. You didn't answer me. Nina stood his ground. Where's the line between bending the rules out of common sense and failing in our duty? Duty, my shebs. I don't mean duty to the Republic. I mean to our own. So some orc can choose to do a runner because he's so criffing independent. But the poor grunts in the Galactic Marines have to stay and suck it up. When do they get to choose? Aden squatted down level with Nina. He grabbed his wrist and forced Nina's hand in comlink up to the Commando's mouth. So tell Zay then. You want to know what happens next. This isn't like a proper army. Sol won't get a court-martial. He won't get jailed or busted down a rank. They'll put a blaster round through his head, because they can't trust him again, and they can't have an orc on the loose. Nina and Aiden were frozen, eyes locked on each other. Maybe that's what someone who leaves his buddies to do. The fighting deserves, said Nina. Go ahead then, finish it. Aiden let go of Nina's wrist as if he were throwing it away, and stood up. Sol ambled around at a short distance, head down, arms folded, looking for all the world as if he were listening to comlink chatter in a non-existent helmet. Tommen suddenly found himself preoccupied with unknowns that Scarata had never covered in training. Who would fire the shot? Who executed renegades? He couldn't imagine a brother clone or a Jedi officer pulling the trigger. Maybe they called in Republic intel. They certainly couldn't call on CSF to do it. CSF was now very friendly with clones in general, thanks to Scarata. Shrabiga, Nina snapped, and tossed the comlink back at Aiden. Then he got up and stalked off. Nina wasn't sulking. Tommen knew he was walking away from the temptation to hit the knoll, because he'd never heard him use language like that before. Just remember that if you ever expect us to haul your shebs out of the fire. Aiden watched him go and shook his head. He had rather beaten skin that made him look older than Ordo and Morel, and a distinctly paternal air. Don't you get it? He turned to the 3 remaining commandos. What happened to any clone who can't be patched up and deployed again? Or when we get too old to fight? Tommen found himself pinned down by Aiden's intense stare. He had to answer, "Yeah, I think about it a lot." "And you notice any pension plans or retirement facilities?" Aiden rolled his eyes. "Attended any career resettlement courses, did you?" In quiet moments with Etain, the moments when he began to get a glimpse of what was tearing Phi apart, Daman tried not to dwell on it, because there was nothing he could think of doing that didn't mean leaving his buddies in the lurch. And statistically, he wasn't likely to be around to worry about premature old age anyway. But the idea of being too badly hurt to be worth saving did trouble him. He liked life, all right. He loved it. Anyone who thought clones didn't have a sense of fear or mortality was a fool. Or maybe a civilian justifying that it was okay to use them, because they weren't like real humans. The whole squad was silent. Aiden seemed to be getting exasperated. "You're expendable," he said, all slow, deliberation, emphasizing each syllable. "All soldiers are, always have been, but you are extra expendable. No rights, no vote, no families to kick up a stink about your treatment. And no connections to any community that'll fight for you. Bred, used, and disposed of when you are beyond economic repair or show too much dissent. Fine by noble martyrs, but do it because you choose it. Not because you're a cage-farmed Nuna and you don't know how to think otherwise." Fai was usually the one with all the chat and a knack for diffusing situations. But he was disturbingly silent now. He seemed to have an increasingly uneasy relationship with the outside world. He craved it. Daman could almost taste the envy when Fai caught glimpses of other beings' lives. But he looked like he tried to put it out of his mind, too. Maybe because he was sure he'd never have a life beyond the Gar. Nana had proved to be far better at shutting things out than Phi. It must have been easier for the rank and file troopers. They saw almost nothing of the world beyond the battlefield. They hadn't been raised by father figures like Skraza or Val, so they clung to one another as all they had. Yeah, cage-farmed Nuna, and the cage could look like a safe haven when you left it. It was a good comparison. The outside world was unknown and scary. Institutional neurosis. Skraza called it "problem with wars," Phi said at last. Voice suddenly a stranger's. Is that they show people what they can really do when they put their minds to it. And that makes peace pretty uncomfortable for governments. When it finally comes, you can't put them back in their box. "You don't know anything about peace," said Aiton. "None of us does." Daman tried to lighten the mood. Odo's been telling him stories again. Sol was still raiding there. Daman wondered if he would have pulled the trigger on the Ark if he'd been ordered to. Never teach clones to read. Odo doesn't know anything about peace either, Aten said. Daman felt he was equally ignorant, but he reserved the right to keep thinking about it. If the point was winning the war, then someone had to have thought what would happen to the army afterward. Do you think Seb's got a girlfriend? Fi asked. If he has, she probably escaped from the Galactic City Violent Offenders Unit. Daman nudged his brother. Come on, Fi. Don't obsess. Not your type. I never hold it against a girl for being a psychopath. Fi made a visible effort to be his other self. Can't be too picky. Well, much as I love soaking up the wisdom of you great philosophers, I've got things to do. Aiden gestured to Daman to get up. Go retrieve Sol's kit. He'll tell you where he buried it. Meanwhile, he's going to tell me all he knows about Iat. Deal, Sol? Doc shrugged. So you can wipe him out better. If you've got a little friend in Iat that you want to rescue, now's the time to mention it. Sol shook his head. Nobody. Funny. Even the lizards don't recognize me now. I must make a big impression. You going to debrief on Iat or not? Sol seemed to consider it. Okay. But there's nothing you don't already have from the guy who's built the place. Daman diverted to find Nina on his way to dig up Sol's armor. He was standing by a tree looking out over the escarpment, fingers hooked in the rear waistband of his undersuit, and he didn't turn around as Daman walked up behind him and put a hand on his shoulder. Armor up, Sarge. Let's find Sol's kit. Nina turned, and Daman had expected to see some remnant of anger, but he looked more upset than bottling up fury. It was as if he'd had bad news. Okay, he said, still distracted. Are you all right, Vodka? Can I ask you a question? That wasn't Nina at all. He didn't edge around issues. Daman felt uneasy. Well, yeah, go ahead. If you could go now, if you could get on a transport and go wherever you want, no consequences, even take Etain with you, would you go? Leave the army? Leave the squad? Leave us behind? Daman chewed the idea over, and it made his gut churn. These weren't the men he'd been raised with in his first pod of 4 clones. Every member of Omega was the sole survivor from his last squad. But these were still his brothers in arms. Men who knew exactly what he was thinking, how he felt about everything. What would make him annoyed, what he liked to eat. Every last tiny detail of every breath taken each day. He would never have that degree of intimacy with anyone else. Maybe not even Etain. He could hardly imagine a day without them. He wasn't sure how that would fit into the vague idea of being with Etain, in some state of domestic bliss that he didn't understand and had only glimpsed around him. But he knew that being separated from his brothers would rip a hole in him that would never heal. He'd never come to terms with losing Vin, Jay, and Taylor when they were all part of Theta Squad. And just like Delta, even now, thought death happened to other squads, never theirs. That was before they faced the real war. That was when an accidental death in training shocked them into silence for days. Nino was still waiting for his answer. It's not about serving the Republic, Da. I don't even know what the Republic is now or why it's better than the Seps. All I know is that I go out each day trying not to get killed and making sure you guys don't die either. Nothing more than that. So, what fills that space when you leave your brothers behind? Nana was still thinking about Sol and why he could walk away while his comrades stayed. It was more than loyalty to the Republic and all that guff that Django had hammered into them. Wouldn't you rather be somewhere nice, doing something other than fighting? Daman asked. Da, would you leave? It's not going to happen, Daman said at last. Is that yes or no? He wasn't sure. He wasn't even certain what a Daman outside the army would be, let alone separated from his brothers. So don't even think about it. But Daman went on thinking about it as they checked their positions and hunted for Sol's armor. He was sure that Nina was thinking about it too. Tilsat, Quilora, Day 3 of the evacuation. 476 days after Geonosis. This, said Levitt, is what happens when you give a lot of overpowered, easily portable hardware to locals who know the terrain better than we do. Etain knew the farmers would use every trick General Zay had taught them during the resistance, but that didn't make capturing them much easier. So far, the troopers had sized 500 or so alive, and bundled them into transports. The rest had scattered into small groups, taking the abundance of Republic-supplied weapons with them. If the farmers had been separatists, the planet would have been cleared by now. But hands were tied. These were Republic citizens, and this was the Galanan's planet, which meant it couldn't be reduced to wasteland. It wasn't the way any of them wanted to fight, except maybe her. But so far the fighting had followed a pattern. After the farmers had taken a few fatalities, they surrendered. They seemed to feel they'd made their point, and now that they were scared and exhausted, they wanted an end to it. With that in mind, Etain pursued the strategy of picking off a few in each group and inviting a surrender. It didn't seem to be working this time. The platoon was pinned down in the river valley north of Telsat. The 7 other platoons were scattered, chasing the largest rebel groups that had broken away. 5 to 1 had looked like easy odds for clone troopers, but the complications of trying to remove the colonists in one piece had handicapped them badly, and the time was fast approaching when Etain was going to give that up as a bad job. Incoming. An artillery round smashed through the trees behind Etain's position, showering the line of troops with shards of ice and branches. She ducked instinctively, force or no force. Levitt, usually glued to her side, sprinted away behind the defensive wall that had been merely shed, and dropped to his knees to operate an Ereb repeating blaster that was now standing idle on its tripod. The gunner lay sprawled with his leg at an awkward angle. Another trooper was trying frantically to remove his helmet. Levitt lay down fire as two clones worked on their fallen brother's injuries, and Etain realized that she could no longer prioritize as a commander had to. All she could see was the wounded trooper. Who is he? She always tried too hard to learn their names. They always had names among themselves, not just the numbers their Kaminoran's masters gave them. And this one escaped her. She felt she was denying him. She couldn't let him be a stranger, but now she had to. You have to fight. You can't fall back and played medic. The farmers were spread across the hillside above the platoon, hiding in ice-glazed crags and hollows. And somewhere up there they had a small but devastating artillery piece, supplied by the Republic, to help them drive out the separatists. They also had a lot of blasters rifles, and what was effective against droids could also be lethal applied to regular trooper armor. Her lightsaber and force powers were of limited use for attacking dispersed fire. All she could do was fend off rounds and debris, because her concentration had vanished. Once she could have centered herself and visualized the threat, taking in the very fabric of the air, and land and water, and deflect plasma bolts, or sent snipers crashing against the rocks. Now she tried to locate each firing position to focus on that alone. Pregnancies changed me. Not that I was that strong in the Force to start with. To her left, Levitt directed fire into the hillside, placing Ereb rounds in a neat sequence that sent small avalanches down the hill, exposing grass and rock. Troopers were ranged around her, targeting sniper positions at either end of the valley. She waited for him to pause firing and adjusted her headset comlink. Casualties, Commander. She should have had a lieutenant in command, or a captain at most, not the services of a full commander. But every Jedi general got one, even insignificant Jedi Knights like her. When this starts to cost too much, I think arrest isn't an option. 10 men injured, too serious. Get them case-vacked. We had to recall the AT to do that at the moment, ma'am. And there's the small matter of where we evacuate them to anyway. If the Bacta and Med droids can't fix them, nobody can. Some generals might have thought that 10 men down out of a platoon of 36 was acceptable, but Etain didn't. Let's take the hillside out then. Let me confirm that. You no longer want to take prisoners. Etain could hardly believe that what she was saying. They're farmers, your elite troops. With the gloves off, this would have taken you no time at all. You want one last try at talking them down, ma'am? Levitt knew her better than she thought. He seemed to understand that she'd blame herself later if she didn't offer them one last chance to surrender. How many more times she had to offer, she had no idea. They'd made their intentions clear. Okay, bring up the AT. Blasters exchanges continued, but the troopers seemed to be fighting in complete silence. They could hear their comlink circuit in their helmets. She couldn't. There was just the crack of blaster rounds and the rain of frozen soil as cannon rounds right into the farmland around them. When she remembered to click her teeth to activate the platoon comlink circuit, the voices switched on in her earpiece, and she was plunged into the chaotic noise of battle, of men calling positions, and range of elevation, and one voice repeating, "Is he okay? Is Ven okay? Is Ven okay?" Ven. He did have a name. She knew it now. Etienne switched back to her, closed the circuit with Levitt. "How long before the AT's in range, Commander?" 12 standard minutes, ma'am." Okay, she concentrated on the hillside. Opposite. Thinking into the minds of the men and women she'd known, trained, and tried to persuade them by thought influence that they were hesitant, uncertain if they wanted to continue this anxious to leave for a better life. "Cease fire. Stand by." The troopers lowered their blasters immediately and edged back from the wall, some dragging wounded comrades. One of them wasn't showing any signs of movement at all. Ven lay a little way from the Ereb, helmet beside him, bright scarlet blood leaking into the snow and melting it. His comrade was still pumping his chest two-handed. The firing from the hillside tailed off into silence. Etienne could sense the emotions around her like patches of colored light. Sharp yellows of fear, the blue-white pulsing intensity of ebbing life, and something she could only identify as childlike, faint and gray. It was an echo of what she'd first sensed of Darman. It wasn't innocence, though. It felt lost and in need. The baby kicked again. For a moment, she thought it was him. One day, he would need to know that his mother had done everything she could to give the farmers a way out. "Burhan," she yelled. "Burhan, are you out there?" The valley echoed. Unruly Kulora sounds carried a long way. She thought she could hear the distant e-unk of the assault walker, picking its way through the fields toward the road. "It's not Burhan." The voice that called back to her was a woman's. "You can stop this now. You can all walk out of here." There was a long pause. "You're the ones who are cut off on both sides. And we're the ones who've been trying to take you alive up till now." The yelling was making Etienne's throat sore. She checked her chrono. "I give you 5 standard minutes to lay down your weapons and surrender." Silence. Absolute silence. Other than the backdrop of wild sounds that Darman had labeled NFQ, normal for Kulora. "I suspect that's going to be a no," Etienne said. She waited, glancing at her chrono from time to time. It was so quiet that she could hear the snow flurries hitting the trooper's armor, rattling like beans. Levitt walked his way back toward her and signaled to check ahead. Narrowing her eyes against the snow, she could see movement from the lower slopes of the hill. Figures in drab working clothes, faces swathed in scarves, rose slowly and held their hands up in surrender. Thank the Force. Some sense at last. She watched carefully for weapons, but they really did seem to have thrown down their rifles. She risked standing up, lightsaber in hand. Ma'am, when will you learn to keep your head down? Levitt said sharply. Jedi doesn't mean invulnerable. I've got armor, she said, and I can deflect blaster bolts if they take a pot shot at me. It seemed unnecessarily aggressive to activate her lightsaber, but she did it anyway. She wasn't taking any chances. As she edged forward, with the weapon held away from her body, more figures popped up from snow-covered crags, some with hands on knees, hands on heads, some simply holding blasters and rifles aloft. The farmers on the lower slopes had started to pick their way down towards the road. Their resistance seemed to be a gesture now. They just wanted to show some fight, save face, and be able to tell their children that they hadn't gone quietly. Pride mattered to them. She understood that. Okay. She walked forward a few more meters and called out to them. You've got nothing to fear. No reprisals. I swear. We are just going to take your weapons. There was no response. They seemed to be taking a long time to get down the slope, but the snow was more like packed ice and treacherously slippery. She turned to Levitt, nodded, and then waved some of the platoon forward to relieve the farmers of their weapons. 15 troopers advanced through what had been a field of bark grain in the summer, ghosts against the white landscapes, picked out by the black of their bodysuits, visible between the plates of plastroid alloy, and the single green rank flash of a sergeant. Etain checked one more thing off her mental list. It was slow going, but they were getting there. Levitt evacuate the... That was as far as she got. An explosion peppered her face with dirt and lifted 2 troopers meters into the air. One fell screaming and the other couldn't because he was blown apart. Mines. The platoon froze, trapped in an uncharted minefield. Trap. You don't do that. You just don't surrender and lure my men to their deaths. Etain's sense of time evaporated. She saw some of the farmers grab their weapons again, and an instinct overtook her that wasn't a Jedi at all. An instinct to kill for this act of betrayal. Levitt was yelling over the comlink as the remaining men, still behind cover, opened up with rifles and erupted fire. Etain raised her lightsaber before she even realized she'd seen the muzzle flash of a blaster bolt, batting it away. The comlink was filled with a cacophony of orders and responses, some from the assault walker. Another mine detonated. Another man screamed. Blaster fire and artillery rounds rained down from the hillside. Etain took a moment to realize it was her own voice calling in fire from the assault walker. AT bearing 5560. Take it out. I repeat, take it out. Shouldn't get in Levitt's way. He's the commander. He knows what he's doing. They're killing my men. They'll pay for that. There was no moral argument left in her about who had first betrayed whose trust here. All that was left was her will to survive, and to save her comrades. It was that visceral, that stark, that un-Jedi. She had no sense of anyone else around except the dead and wounded troopers. She had no sense of anything beyond stopping the incoming fire and venting this red-hot rage that was choking her and tightening a band around her forehead. She hadn't even realized she'd gone into the minefield. She felt she could see through the snow and soil to the devices beneath. Devices they should have detected. No, they were custom anti-droid trip mines. Plastroid and remotely armed. Somehow, she was avoiding them all. But the troopers had no such force senses and simply knelt where they'd been forced to stop and return fire. Out of all the things she saw that day, that was the most extraordinary. Men pinned down on an exposed field, still fighting, when the slightest movement might set off an unseen mine next to them. None of them was paralyzed by panic. No wonder fools thought that clones felt no fear. Ma'am, stop. Hold it, for fear effect's sake. Levitt's voice rang in her comlink. No, she wasn't going to stop. She couldn't. The hillside ahead of her erupted in a massive plume of snow and dirt that rose into the air and fell again, like hail. Then there was a rumbling sound. A section of the hillside gave way, taking rocks and soil with it. The sheet of compacted snow slid off like frosting, separating from a cake and came to rest like an avalanche. The walker fired again, shuddering with the recoil, and the stony ridge near the crest shadowed as if a fist had punched through a sheet of transparent steel. The explosions deafened her for a few moments, and then she felt grit and ice pepper her face and ducked. There was a second explosion, and a third, and when she raised her head again, she couldn't see the hill. Through the storm of debris that was rolling toward her like a giant foaming wave, the soil beneath her shook as intensely as a groundquake. And then the airborne debris began to hit the ground. The huge billowing wave collapsing, leaving behind it a reshaped hill, and a road blocked by rock, soil and ice. The rebel fire was now coming only from the position to the south of them, not the hill, and men were still stranded in the minefield. "Ma'am, I said stay where you are," Levitt shouted. "No, you stay where you are, Commander." Etaine's anger always got the better of her. She'd never learned to control it. If the dark side wanted her now, then it could take her as long as she got her people clear. Take out the other artillery position. Just suppress it, okay? And I'm pregnant. Am I crazy? I'm risking my child's life. It's not mine to risk. But the ATTE was already in action, pounding the southern position at the other end of the small valley with its cannon. It felt like a holovid was playing in the background, something utterly divorced from what was happening on the minefield. And it was. There was nothing it could do for them, other than suppress fire. She was in a minefield surrounded by stranded men, some of them bleeding to death. It was the sound that tipped her over the edge. They said wounded men cried for their mothers, but troopers had no mothers. They didn't even have a father figure like Scarata. They called for their brothers. She knew now because one was doing just that. He was calling for Beck, or at least it sounded like that. Beck wasn't responding. Maybe Beck was one of the dead. It broke her heart, and her last fragile ties to the Jedi. She looked over her shoulder. Levitt was edging his way through the minefield. She didn't just try to influence his mind. She put all her effort into making him stop dead. He hesitated for a moment, but kept coming. You can't detect these minds with your senses. Levitt, don't try. She waved him back. I can sense what you can't. I'm okay. Don't do this. Something caught her peripheral vision. A flicker of movement, nothing more. She steered, and then the snow seemed to ripple like an oil-covered sea. Shapes emerged from it. White Galanan shapes, and a dozen or more crept into the minefield. Galanans could sense variations in soil density. Of course, Junod had located Gedan tunnels for her during Omega's first mission, so they could detect buried trip mines. One of the Galanans tiptoed over to her. Jinot, Etain whispered. Go, careful. Varakil, said the Galanan. It was Jinot, consort once Zay's personal spy. Can't you even tell us apart? I can't even see you half the time. We'll mark a clear path so you can rescue your wounded. I'll lead your other men out of here. I owe you. Yes, you'll do, Jedi. And if anything happens to you, then we may pay the price. Just shut up and follow me. I can sense where the mines are. I'm okay. Pity you didn't sense they were there before you sent your men in. It was brutally true. Etain's moment of qualified relief was destroyed by shame and guilt. This was her fault. She'd caused these troopers' deaths through her own incompetence, and not military incompetence at that. She hadn't used her own force senses well enough, but she didn't have the luxury of self-pity now. She called to the stranded troops, who could still walk, unsure if the anti-droid mines had emitted EM pulses too. Can you still hear me? Yes, ma'am. Follow the Galanans. Walk in their footprints. They can lead you out. It was going to be harder moving the wounded men, but she'd do it. She wasn't going to leave a single man behind, dead or alive. Levitt clicked back into her comlink circuit. Ma'am, a Lottie will be here in a few minutes. We'll rinse them clear. Back out of there, please. What about the downdraft? Might detonate some more devices. I have orders, ma'am. My general safety comes first. No, it doesn't. Etain thought again about her child. But his father was one of these men. None of their lives could count for less than hers. Or there was no meaning to having this baby. I am a Jedi. I can do this. There was one man she could reach easily. He was 10 meters away, not moving. But but she sensed he was alive. His right leg was shredded below the knee. Her four senses of danger was fully alert now, and when she looked at the snow, churned up with debris and blood, she could see where the mines were, like heat haze in her field of vision. She placed her boots carefully. If she could get a hold on him, lifting him with force assistance would be relatively easy. There was a meter-wide safe area she could see. Keeping her balance would be a problem, but if she could get him across her shoulders, she could lift him. She'd watched Darman lift Iten by rolling on him first, but she didn't have enough safe space to do that. All she could do was kneel, carefully on one foot a hand span from a haze that indicated a mine, and ease her head and shoulders under his body. He made a sound as the air was pushed from his lungs, but he wasn't conscious. He'd lost too much blood. She was stuck now, the full weight of him across her back, and as she shuffled her legs into a kneeling position, she nearly rolled him out of the safe zone. It took a little more maneuvering to get where she could straighten up and try the movement that needed a lot of help from the force. To stand with an 80-kilo man across her back. After that, it was easy, relatively. Etienne took a deep breath and was vaguely aware of the sound of the LAATI in the distance. As she counted to 3, tightened her grip on the margins of his armor plates, and then pushed upward, locking out her knees. For a moment, the tendons felt as if they would never stretch out. She tottered a little. Then she found her balance and turned very carefully to walk, bent over at 45 degrees, between the shimmering patches in the snow that only she could see. The weight lifted off her shoulders, and she gripped more tightly, thinking she was dropping him. But she found she was clear of the minefield, and a couple of his comrades had simply hauled him off her back. Levitt caught her by the shoulder. "Enough, ma'am. Even if I have to slug you, you're not doing that again. Understand? Leave it to the woodsman." She didn't feel so clever now. She weighed 45 kilos, and she'd admit even to herself that she was skinny. Okay. She looked around at separate little scenes of despair. Troopers receiving first aid from comrades, while the med droid from the ATTE hovered among them. She hadn't even noticed the huge 6-legged walker move in. Now she could see the trooper hit earlier, Ben and his buddy kneeling over him, face pinched and yellow with the cold. Once troopers took their helmets off to attempt mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, they were as vulnerable to the freezing conditions as anyone. She walked across to him, feeling unsteady, and squatted down. "Can't get a pulse, ma'am," he said quietly. "He's not dead." She put her hands on Ven's forehead and felt the life in him, weak but holding on. She couldn't see where he'd been hit. The vulnerable points were the gaps between the armor sections. Extreme cold improved survival chances with some injuries. The med droid will be with him in a few minutes. Ven's skin felt like a corpse. She knew exactly what a cadaver felt like. Okay. Okay, ma'am, thanks. She'd been at this stage before, numb, not fully aware of her surroundings, and unsure how much time had elapsed. The firing had stopped, so the surviving farmers, if there were any after the ATTE's cannon bombardment, must have moved on. Most of the Golanans had vanished, except for the few helping the gunship's winchmen get a harness on, the remaining dead and wounded. It was odd to watch them. They could take any form they pleased, anything at all. Yet instead of shapeshifting into something with hands, they remained in what she thought of as the animal form. It was as if they felt they didn't have to change any longer. They had their planet back. Very nearly, it seemed like a kind of physical nationalism, where they could be themselves again. "You okay now, ma'am?" said Levitt. Eugene watched the walker squat in the low positions to open its hatches and take in the wounded and on repulsor's gurneys. Ven's skin was like pale wax. Other men were suffering from blast trauma, shaking around inside their armor by mines or artillery rounds. Even a helmet didn't prevent brain injury, and their armor wasn't that expensive, ultra-toughened Catan type that enabled Fi to throw himself on a grenade and come out of the encounter just badly shaken. The med droid was injecting medication to stop intracranial swelling. One man was having a temporary shunt inserted through his skull to drain off fluid. "I'm not injured, if that's what you mean." She turned to look at Levitt, unable to judge his degree of annoyance in the Force. He was a calm sea of self-control, with undercurrents hidden so deep that she couldn't tell if they were violence, sorrow, or passion. "Sorry, I didn't mean to cause you anxiety. See all these horrible medical details I know about now. I didn't want to learn this the hard way. Maybe when I get out, I can use this be a medic, not a Jedi. Not after this war. Not if, but when." It was more than worrying about Darman. It was all of them, the clone soldiers she loved, the ones she knew as friends, the ones she didn't know and never would. It overtook her now. She worried that her anxiety would damage the baby, and slid her arms inside her cloak to put a surreptitious hand on her belly, and send a sense of comfort to him. He was agitated. Her state of mind was affecting him. He seemed almost angry. It'll be all right. But she had no name for him. She didn't dare. And if he was angry, it was something he'd inherited from her. "We're done," Levitt said. He stood, listening, one finger held up for silence, and Etain heard a single shriek. A man, a woman, she couldn't tell, in the distance. The Golanans were picking off the rebel farmers who'd escaped the bombardment. "I ordered this. I started it. I did it. I made the mistake about the minefield." Etain was simply dismayed, and to take stock of the person she'd become and how far her Jedi training, contemplation, reason, non-violence had receded into the distance. Ma'am, time to move on and track down the others. This is going to be a long, fiddly job. Okay, Etain needed a moment. She stared down at the compressed pink snow where Ven had lain, while his buddies worked on, keeping him alive. There was more blood than she'd expected, but it was hard to tell when it had stained the snow and spread. Blood and water or slush always looked worse than it was. I'll be with you shortly. She stood thinking of Daman, picturing him so that the baby might possibly see what she saw in the Force, and then made her way to the LAATI gunship. The speeder buses had already left empty, with no farmers to evacuate. Levitt walked behind. Ma'am, he said, hang on. What? You've been hit, ma'am. Look. Etain turned around to face the commander and saw what he spotted. She'd left a trail of blood droplets in her wake. Instinctively, she looked for injuries, knowing how easy it was to be numbed to them until the adrenaline wore off. Then it dawned on her. The blood wasn't coming from an injury, but running down her leg. She could feel its brief warmth now, as it cooled on her skin and froze, where it soaked into her clothes. A sudden cramp seized her and doubled her up. She was hemorrhaging. She was losing the baby. Narhead Shipping Company, Napdu 4th moon of Da Sucha, Hut Space. 476 days of the Geonosis. Zev stood to one side of the entrance, staring at Fixer on the other side as he had so many times before. He couldn't remember the last time he'd walked through an unknown door without blowing it up, kicking it open, or melting its locks with a blaster bolt. One day he'd used the controls like everyone else. Scorch knelt between the two of them, edging the thin blades of the hydraulic spreader into the crack between the two halves of the door. I need an explosive fix, Scorch said. I'm fed up with opening them quietly. We don't want an audience arriving to admire your work. Sev, I'm a surgeon among rapid entry artists, Scorch grunted, with an effort as he braced the spreader against his chest and leaned on it. The blades finally slipped into the gap. You're a nerf butcher. Want to be on the menu too? Patience. Or we'll lock you in a room with Phi and let him talk you to death. Fixer let out a long sigh, one of his eloquently wide repertoire of non-verbal responses, and held up his hand to do a mute countdown. 4, 3, 2, 1. Scorch pumped the hydraulics and the blades separated, sliding apart along the length of the bar. The doors were now opened far enough for him to wedge the hydraulic ram between them and part them wide. Sev stepped over him, focused on not letting Kosai's trail go cold. So, they couldn't let Skarata know about this, or Omega come to that. It bothered Sev a lot. He understood the need to know and not know, but something that had to be kept from specific people he knew and trusted, and who wouldn't trust a brother Commando, troubled him. We're not like ordinary men. We are professionals. We don't play games. But what puzzled him most was the order not to tell Val, either. Maybe Zay thought Skarata would wheedle it out of him. The Jedi certainly didn't trust Mandalorians. But maybe that was inevitable, given the free-range nature of Val's and Skarata's Black Ops activities. They might have been old, but they were still thoroughly bad boys. The office was in darkness. Sev's helmet spot lamp picked out desks, grubby mats on the floor, and doors that led to what his senses told him was a long hollow space, a corridor. It probably led to living quarters. It was unusual for traders to live in the same building as the offices on Naboo, because it was just a staging post for the sector's freight. No nice residential neighborhoods. Sev knew that because his HUD-linked database said so. Under a red glowing header that read "Local Conditions," he saw too little of the galaxy's day-to-day life to judge for himself. So he still relied on intel. He could see Scorch and Fix's view of the dark office in their point of view, HUD icons, and Fixer was already slicing into the computer records. And Kosai's trail led here. After it was shaken and beaten out of reluctant informants, Vanai Waterworld and smugglers, having stopping off at Icarus, another waterworld, rife with piracy and other scum, to Naboo. Fixer took a probe from his belt and slid it into the computer's port, then stood in a pose of frozen concentration as he watched the screen. "Business is booming," he said. "They really ought to shut the system down at night and password protect the startup." Scorch prowled, taking Flimsy out of his files. Anyone who still used Flimsy either had data they didn't want to commit to a sliceable medium, or was neurotic about keeping backups for the tax office. And that would slow you down how long, exactly? 30 seconds? Fixer grunted meaningfully. Sev, half his attention on points of entry and exits, and the other half on Fixer's HUD. Viewer of the scrolling spreadsheets could hear Boss clearing his throat. The sergeant was 100 meters away, waiting in a TIV, a special ops traffic interdiction vessel that masqueraded as a packet courier, and the disembodied sound of someone coughing and swallowing irritated. Sev a great deal. Boss. Problem, Sev? You, boss. When I can take my bucket off, I'll goggle with Bacta. Got a cold, okay. Fixer came to life again. That's the contents of his data Sarge copied across Scorch. Scorch was still sifting through a pile of flimsy, moving it from one stack to another, and pausing to stare at each sheet. He was scanning the contents on his HUD. Holo recorder. This is just old stuff. Might as well grab what I can, though. Boss's voice rasped on the comlink. This suspect is orbiting another waterworld, Delta. Dasucha. See a trend. Sev heard a faint creak and padded up to the interior doors. He listened carefully, then pressed a sound sensor to the panels. Prepare to bang out. I detect signs of unintelligent life, and it's not Scorch. Fixer shut down the computer, grabbed a trashy ornament, a souvenir faux crystal vase from Galactic City with long dead insects piled up in the bottom, and broke open a cash credit box to pocket the contents. Bao had taught them to make infiltrations look like robberies, if they could, and Sev remained impressed by his old training sergeant's unerring eye for the choicest deposit boxes on Magito. Whatever Val did, he did it exceptionally well. He's the best. Why should I expect any less from us? He made me what I am. He cares whatever Skrata thinks. Okay, we're gone, said Fixer, and vanished through the doors with Scorch. Sev backed out after them, DC-17 aimed, in case the owner walked in and become another unfortunate statistics in a lawless sector. Burglars didn't usually wear Catan armor. It would have been hard to leave a live witness. The three commandos sprinted down the road. No street lighting. All properties shuttered. No prying eyes. And down a dark alley to catch up with Boss. The TIV sat like a crouching animal in the gap between two repulsor trucks. The hatch opened and they piled inside. Okay, let's thin out and run through the data. Boss punched in the coordinates to take the TIV into a freight lane out to Nar Shaddaa, and held his hand out for the data chip. Come on, Fixer. Got to transmit it back to base for General Jusik to sift through. Fixer dropped it into Boss's palm. Bet I find it before he does. You can have a techies race between you, Squat said, taking off his helmet and rolling his head to ease his neck muscles. He's okay, old Jusik. Fixer pounced on the chips as soon as Boss had transmitted the contents and slotted it into his datapad. Sev, sliding across the bench, seat in the crew bay to lean on his shoulder, noted that there were an awful lot of freight and passenger transactions. Fixer shrugged him away. They're off. go past a scorch. Sev heard his comm click off, and Fixo was in a world of his own, searching for all traffic that came from or connected with Vanai in the last 6 months. Sev eased off his helmet and gazed at the starscape. It was pretty. There were things out there he wanted to see and do, and probably never would. But he was determined not to think about it, or else he'd end up a whiner like Phi. Always regretting what he couldn't have. His life was too short to waste it like that. It took an effort to steer away from speculation and longing, but Sev prided himself on his single-mindedness, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. So, what's Zay's problem with Skarata? Squash asked, kicking the back of Sev's seat. The benches were arranged one behind the other. Doesn't he trust him? Doesn't trust him not to make Tatushi out of Kosai, Boss murmured. Papa Cal got off to a bad start with the Kaminoans. Scorch carried on swinging his boot against the metal frame. Is it true he killed one? Who knows? He's crazy enough. So what's Val going to do with his stash? Sev turned around, grabbed Scorch's ankle, and twisted to make the point. Maybe he'll pay for a nice Beskar saber for me, so I can remove the source of this irritation. Come on, you'd miss me if I got killed. Nobody's going to get killed, except by me. Shut it, you two. Boss took a sudden intense interest in the Tiv's Retina display. Busy lane. Don't distract the pilot. Fixed a gaze glued to his datapad. Suddenly stirred and pulled off his helmet. Pay that. What? Sev asked. 15 flights booked and that originated on Aquarius or Vanai. 5 of those passed through both. 2 of the 5 went on to Dasucha. 1 paid for in cash credits. Boss muttered to himself. Very busy lane. Vessels, Scorch asked. 1 hydrographic survey vessel. 1 private charter. The druggy ship was the cash credit transaction. So, she's doing the Waterworld Grand Tour. Sev pictured the rough layout of the galaxy, mentally plotting a course from Commando, then to Vanai, then Icarus, then Dashucha. It looked as if Kosai had headed out along the margin of the outer rim, toward the Tingle Arm, and then looped back. Maybe to cover her tracks, maybe to avoid something. Whatever she was doing, she was hopping from one ocean world to another, looking for a new house with a pool. Better find the pilot and shake him down about the trip. What if it's not Kosai? Sev was distracted by the fact that Boss wasn't joining in. I suppose we start over from Aquarius. If the informant was telling us the truth, we'll pay him a visit if his memory needs help. Scorch rolled his eyes. How many Kaminoans do you think go wandering around the outer rim, Sev? Boss interrupted. I hate to ruin your travel plans, gentlemen, but this is a busier freight lane than anyone has a reason to expect. Check out the Joker who's tailgating us. All 4 commandos squeezed forward to stare at the retina screen. There was a small, fast vessel right up their tail, so close that if they'd vented the race tank, It would have spattered the view screen. It wasn't the kind of thing that bad pilots did. It was what someone in pursuit did. It's a big galaxy, said Sev, pulling on his helmet and stealing the collar for vacuum. He felt his stomach tighten, and his pulse pounded in his throat. He could overtake Scorch. Scorch helmeted up too. Maybe he wants your autograph. Boss command back to base. The sensors showed that the vessel's weapons were charging, and the transponder trace read unknown. The cannon round that shaved past their port side was definitely known, though. It had trouble written all over it.